The other interesting thing is that the way the company is now structured, joint venture that is, it may consider establishing a separate agreement with a major copper miner to accelerate the exploration and potential development of its copper properties. This would be an interesting thing to do, but in my view, we should spend more money ourselves initially on the selected properties to get more value and potentially interest in setting up a commercial arrangement. Next slide, please. Now, the potential growth in value of the joint venture, the company has a founding capital established of 30 million. We have contributed 13.6 million of our 15 million to earn into 50%. And the balance will probably contribute over the next few months, but we are committed contractually to find this 1.4 million by December 31, 2024. Now, just as an order of magnitude, the scoping studies for the first two mines indicate a combined NPV at a discount rate of 8%. I think gold prices varying between $1,800 and $2,000 per ounce. Their combined NPV is about 270 million, actually, not 260. And the surplus cash generation from these couple of properties over a 10-year period should be in excess of $400 million. Now, there's the potential to increase those returns with the inclusion of the processing facility at La Demahagya that's now planned to produce a gold doré from the lower valued refractory concentrate. And the processing facility will also produce additional antimony, which is in high demand. Interestingly, the NPV is not an indication of what you can sell it for, obviously, but it gives you a clue. This is about $9 per share, US per share for MLV issued shares. And obviously it's a target, but it certainly indicates the potential value in excess of the $1 per share that we've contributed. There is a potential to expand that Neves Urbana mine. It's a very small mine, but we believe, as do our consultants, that with the copper mineralisation continuing at depth and potentially into the El Pilo porphyry deposit, that mine can actually be expanded, and certainly its mine life extended. There is also the possibility of attracting, as I just mentioned, an additional high-grade gold deposit, which is called Jacinto, which is in central Cuba, and that's held by Geominera, and we're negotiating to bring that on board as a potential third mine. Obviously, the underground operations at La Demahagya could extend the life of the project, but obviously that also needs fairly extensive exploration before one could count on that. Ultimately, it's the porphyry copper prospects that will see substantial growth in the company, but that's a fair way down the track, obviously. Next slide, please, Alex. Now, why we're focused on Cuba? The country's mineral rich, it's underexplored, has low operating costs, realistic mineral royalties. The government's encouraging foreign investment in the mining sector, and the mining and environmental regulations are reasonable, and the partnership effectively de-risks permitting. We've found that things like environmental permits and so forth go through very smoothly. I guess it's the influence of our partner. There are investment incentives in Cuba, including the waiving of income tax for 8 years and import duties for capital equipment and supplies are waived. We nominate all senior management for the projects and for the exploration in Cuba. the project loans. This is an important one, actually. We were the first one to request this in Cuba, and that is that the joint venture is required to set up a foreign bank account. It'll probably be in Canada or Spain, and all project loans are fed into that account, as are sales proceeds, and dispersed from there to creditors and for dividends, and obviously servicing of loans. And this, in effect, eliminates the country credit risk for the various stakeholders. We take some confidence in Cuba as a jurisdiction through the significant and expanding investments of Sherritt in the nickel sector, Trafigura, who have a $300 million base metals mine in Cuba and are expanding that to another major copper property, and Melbana Energy, which is an Australian oil and gas company that are very active in the country. Next slide, please, Alex. This is a quick discussion on the Nueva Sabana gold copper mine. In stage one, I talk about because we're referring here only to the first 4 years. The deposit has a small 3 gram per tonne gold cap. Then it goes down to the underlying copper gold zone, and then below that again there's a copper zone which is open at our drilling depth of 150 metres. Now, geologists believe it will transition into the El Pilar copper deposit, which is slightly offset to the south of the Nueva Sabana mine. This concession also covers the Gaspar and Camilo porphyry intrusives, and there are a number of shallow gold targets in the surrounding area that we've identified through artisanal mining. So there's a reasonable chance that this little mine will extend in time and in scale. The MRE, the initial MRE to a depth of 150 metres was published to the ASX on the 6th of March. We'll look at it in a second. And both our geologists and the party who are looking at concentrate offtake have requested a 2,000 metre infill drilling to push some of the inferred resources up into indicated. That drilling program's 80% completed. It'll be finished this month. Next slide, please, Alex. This is just a copy of the MRE. I think the most significant element is in the lower section, that copper domain. In the inferred section down there, you can see there's 35 million pound of copper at nearly 8%. None of that is taken into account in what we're looking at for the first stage of the mine, but it does give us an indication of the potential that additional drilling might bring in the future. So next slide, please, Alex. We've completed a scoping study, which was advised to ASX on the 7th of May. And the pit for the moment is limited to only 100 metres and a 4-year mine life at a mining rate of 500,000, quite low, 500,000 tonne per year. We're confident that with additional exploration and the greater mining depth that would follow, this project life would be probably doubled at least. And I just mentioned that MRE established this additional copper in inferred resources. So it's, again, a positive indication of the prospect for increasing the scale of that mine. Our consultants are all in accord that the copper zone at it's basically a copper mine with some gold credits. It's not a gold mine. But they are all confident that the copper zone will increase or extend at least both laterally and vertically with additional exploration. And the metallurgical test work that's been completed shows a initial gold concentrate around 70 grams per tonne, and this will be followed by a blended copper gold concentrate with 27% copper and 25 grams of gold, which is quite marketable. So next slide, please, Alex. This is just a summary of the financial analysis for the first stage for 4 years of Nueva Sabana. I suppose the important thing is the surplus cash. I can't actually see on the screen what that is because their surplus cash is about $8.30 million per year. Not a big mine, but it would obviously be appreciated by Antilles Gold to receive half of that in dividends. So small mine, but near term. As I said, construction we expect to start in September, but we're still waiting on finalisation of the offtake agreement. We've got a number of offers for offtake, but the more important element is the financing arrangement. And I notice there's questions on that to be answered, so I'll leave that till question time and tell you where we're at with financing. Next slide, please, Alex. The La Damahagua mine is the reason we actually went to Cuba in the first place. Unfortunately, after we'd finished our scoping study to produce a gold arsenic concentrate that one of the international trading companies said that they would indicated that they would purchase and gave us indicative prices, about 50,000 tonne per year. About 18 months ago, they came back and said the market has changed for this particular fairly nasty concentrate with high arsenic content, and that they could only take about 20% of our annual offtake, which of course blew the scoping study and any DFS out of the water. The change in circumstance was basically because the Chinese introduced high levels of taxation on imported gold concentrates with high arsenic content in it. The tax rates were sufficiently high to virtually make the project untenable. And concurrent with that, the excess capacity worldwide outside of China for processing these high arsenic concentrates, refractory concentrates, had reduced, hence the reduction in offtake. So we decided about a year ago now to introduce a concentrate processing facility. Before I talk about that, maybe just quickly, the mine's well located on the Isle of Youth. It's 60, which is 60 nautical miles from the mainland. It's connected by highway to the port, 35 k's, connected to water, electricity and fibre optic cable. It's a 905,000 gold equivalent resource, mainly indicated. The plan is to mine about 800,000 tonne per year of ore and produce two concentrates. One's the gold arsenic pyrite concentrate, and the other is 5,500 tonne of gold silver antimony concentrate. So the scoping study results were there, which are reasonably good at 1,800 ounces, $1,800 per ounce for gold, and 13,000 per tonne for antimony. The NPV 8 for this mine, as originally planned, was $196 million US. Next slide, please, Alex. So, as I started to talk about, and I've broken off, but go back to it, that we've planned now to, as a consequence of the inability to sell the concentrate, to build a two-stage fluidised bed roaster and a CIL circuit and an antimony recovery circuit combined into a processing plant, which will produce a gold doré and will also increase the antimony quantities. Now, we've engaged a Chinese group, BGRIM Technology, who are leaders in China in designing and building these roasters, and we expect the completion of their MET testing and the results, recoveries and so forth, to be received later this month. After we get those, BGRIM will take about 3 months to do some preliminary engineering, and then they'll provide us with a turnkey proposal for the supply of this processing facility. We have indicative capital and operating costs, but which look very positive from a NPV perspective, or increasing same. But we have to wait on formal advice from BGRIM on what they're going to charge us to build one of these plants. So once we've got that information, we should be in a position to revise the scoping study for this expanded project around October. And the aim is to have the project development ready. It says mid-25 here. It will probably be more like Q3 2025. Next slide, please, Alex. Now, as far as the... how are we doing for time? All right. As far as the exploration projects, I won't spend too much time on this, but we've got the LPLR porphyry system, which is underlies the Nevis-Urbana gold copper deposit. Ideal site. It's flat, unoccupied, 60 k's by rail link to the Palo Alto port, which can be dedicated to a major project if such occurs in the future. Our geologists have identified the leached phyllic caps that are indicative of underlying copper porphyry intrusives, and the ground magnetics and induced polarization surveys that we did in early 2023 identified a cluster of 3 porphyry intrusives. That's El Pilar itself, Gaspar, and Camilo within this concession. So next slide, please, Alex. We've drilled 10 holes into the El Pilar intrusive, and all holes demonstrated extensive porphyry-style veining, breccias, and alteration indicative of copper porphyry-style mineralisation. But none of those 10 holes got to the core of the deposit, so more drilling is required. We'll start again in fourth quarter of this year if we've got funds, but it'll be on a limited basis. Next slide, please, Alex. We've had some interesting results. You can see there, ones and up to nearly 2% of copper intersections. One reasonable hole, 4A, which had 134 metres at 1.23% copper. And this is fairly typical of what we've got within these 10 holes. Move on to the next one, Alex, please. So the Sierra Maestra copper belt is an interesting one. There's two prospects. We actually identified 3 areas, but have dropped 1. So there's two remaining concessions that we delineated, our geologists. This is La Cristina, and that sits within which is a exploration concession, and the Vaga Grande, which is a reconnaissance concession, surrounds La Cristina. Our exploration director, who I'll mention very briefly in a second, is highly enthusiastic about La Cristina. He's evidenced copper, gold, molybdenum zones at the surface, and more particularly within old mine workings. He's quite excited about that, but unfortunately we don't have the cash to make him happy at the moment drilling. So not much to talk about there, but they're good assets for the future. Thanks, Alex. So the directors I'd like to really talk about on the next page, if I may. 2 people, or 3 actually, I should say 4, but 2 very important parties to our company. Dr. G, who's our technical director, he's actually a consultant, but we have him on a quite significant retainer. He's based in Vancouver, in Canada, and has exceptional experience in the sort of things that we're involved in, roasters, concentrators, and so on. And he is the link between us and BGRIM, for example, doing the current technical work. He's the link between us and the party that will produce or develop develop the concentrator for Nevis-Urbana. Incredible guy to have within the group. Chris Granger has got a PhD in geology from Western Australia. Very experienced geologist based in Medellin in Colombia. Spent 25 years or over 25 years in Latin America, fluent Spanish. He approached us, Chris, 18 months ago, enthused about Cuban geology and asked if he could consult to us, which he does. And he's very excited about our properties and would like to drill them, obviously, but can't for the moment. Steve Mertens, our general manager in Cuba, is married to a Spanish lady, got the language, and he's a very solid manager. Very pleased to have him on the ground there. So that's it, I think, Alex and listeners. So I guess we'll go to questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian. Yes, as I mentioned at the top, we have had a number of questions come through. We'll try to get through as many as time permits. To start, Brian, the progress on funding for the Nueva Sabana project, can an MOU or similar be signed to bring confidence to the market that there is tangible progress and confidence that a financing agreement will be reached?
I agree that an announcement along these lines would certainly bring confidence to the market, but unfortunately, we're not going to be in a position to do that for a few months. The likely purchaser of the concentrates from the project is carrying out due diligence at the moment on providing an advance on purchases, which would fund the cost of the mine construction. They review the geology, the metallurgy, the capital and operating costs for the first stage of the mine and apparently comfortable with the results. But they require completion of this current 2,000 metre infill drilling program to add surety to the initial life or the first stage of the mine before they'll make a decision. So the drilling, as I mentioned earlier, is 80% completed. Assays are in Peru at the moment for the laboratory, and that drilling program will finish this month. But it'll take a couple more months to receive these assays and upgrade the scoping study to a pre-feasibility, which is the level of study that the concentrate buyer requires to make a decision. So unfortunately, as I said, won't be able to make this announcement for a few months, but all the indications are positive.
Thanks, Brian. So what is the depreciated book value and or expected market value of all property and equipment now released by the Dominican Republic for sale?
The surplus assets in the Dominican Republic have been fully depreciated and have no value in the balance sheet. The achievable sales over the next 6 months are expected to be around 1.5 to 1.5 to 1.6 million.
Thanks, Brian. So how much of the plant has been sold and for how much? And I guess what is left to be sold and what is the estimated value based on interest so far?
Okay, we've only sold and received $150,000 to date for the sale of some minor items, pumps and small transformers and so on. We've received an offer of $750,000 for an oxygen plant and accepted this on an as-is, where-is basis. It's going to be exported to a steel mill in Colombia. And a bill of sale is in the final stages of being negotiated based on progress payments that would go through till mid-September 2024, so paid over the next couple of months in instalments. We also have an offer from a local contractor in the Dominican Republic of $530,000 for 2 dredges, and we've accepted this also, but frankly, we're having some difficulty in extracting a purchase order from the party that's offered these funds. So we'll see how that works out over the next week or two. The large items that are still to be sold include a ball mill, there's a ultrafine grinding ISA mill, cooling tower, a limestone mill, and a number of industrial buildings. They make up the balance of what will be sold. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Brian. Now, just on the settlement of funds from the Dominican Republic arbitration, when are funds due, and what is the final figure you expect to be expected to be received?
Yeah, I know that this is a question on many shareholders' minds, and unfortunately, I'm not in a position right now to reliably answer this question. I'll give some background to that, why I'm not. What's happened is that we've agreed with the Dominican Republic government to attempt to formalise a settlement agreement by the 31st of this month, addressing a number of matters which I'll point out in a second. We're dealing with the General Counsel of the Department of Taxation Department, who's been nominated by the government to be their representative in negotiations. And our representative to date is a solicitor in Santo Domingo who's worked for us for a number of years, with me on the sidelines. But the issues that we're addressing is firstly the recognition of the $4 million that's owing to our subsidiary from the arbitration award. This has actually been agreed by both parties. Now, another issue is the tax department believe we will owe them something, can't quantify it, but we will owe them something based on their intended recalculation of their share of project cash flow, which has resulted from audits that they undertook in 2017 and 18. And we're still waiting on details. We don't know what this amount might be, but they want to offset anything that they think is owed to them against that $4 million. And I can't tell you now whether A, what the amount is, and B, I can't tell you whether it's valid. So that's up in the air, but they've indicated that they'll give us details on that in the coming week, next week. Other issues that I want resolved is that the Director of Mines has wanted to insert his staff in the process of selling these surplus assets and how we would price them. And I've said, no, we've got to have formal arrangement that he just is not involved. It's ridiculous, but that's what he's trying to do at the moment, and we want him to back off. The other issue emanating from the Director of Mines is there's been indications that he might require additional activities as we close the project down. There's a project closure plan that was agreed in 2019. He's now indicating he might want to increase the activities we're responsible for, and we want that clearly set aside any whim that he might have to do any more than is required. And I might add, very little left to do. We've got to get rid of the oxygen plant, pull down a few structures. We've got a price for breaking up the concrete foundations, which gets dumped back in the mines, low cost, and then we're going to revegetate the plant area. We've already revegetated and tidied up all the surrounds of the tailings dam, but the plant site itself needs probably $10,000 or $20,000 spent on it maximum to exit the site. But what we don't want to do is have the Director of Mines, enforcing other issues. The other matter that's up in the air is that we have the option of initiating a civil action against the Director General of Taxation, for which we might pursue or might even offset against any additional share of cash flow that they ask for. The basis for this is the Director knowingly was in contempt of the Supreme Court over there when he illegally garnished our surplus equipment way back in 2019. And those garnishments were on the basis that our subsidiary owed the government taxation when in fact taxation was waived from the contract. Despite that, the taxation department kept going to the courts and getting garnishment. The Supreme Court rejected the concept of taxation being liable, and in fact 2 weeks before the arbitration, after sending us assessments from 2016, the taxation department admitted that tax wasn't liable in the country, so therefore all these garnishments had been and were illegal. We have the right under Dominican law to pursue a civil action, and we are putting that together at the moment. But my thoughts are that we probably, and I say probably, will be able to offset any civil action against any thoughts that they might have on increased cash flow share. So pretty messy. The video conferences start next week on bringing this all to a head. It'll probably mean I have to personally go over there for a week or so towards the end of the month to wrap this up. But I wish I could give you a nice clear answer that we'll receive $4 million at the end of the month, but I can't at this point in time. I'm sorry. But the one thing for certain is that we don't want to proceed with enforcement, which would occur in the district court in Washington if we had to go this route, because it would take 12 months and incur significant legal costs. And I think the company's had enough of those, and I certainly have. So my apologies, I can't give you a clear answer.
Thanks, Brian. Very detailed, nonetheless. Now, how many of Antilles Gold directors fully intend to take up the rights to purchase more company stock at the bargain basement price of 0.4 cents per share?
Yeah, the bargain basement price is right. I know that over 300,000 is going to be contributed or taken up by the directors. I can't be absolutely sure of what from whom, but I think I know for a fact 300,000 applications are in to date, or over 300.
Thanks, Brian. Now, we have received a very detailed question on the actions of the holder of a convertible note, but I believe you don't want to answer this question, as it may prejudice a potential claim for damages against the note holder, which is currently being reviewed by the company's solicitors. Can I just confirm that, Brian?
That's true. I prefer not get into the detail on this matter because our solicitors are certainly considering action, both of the note holder, both before representations made before the signing of the convertible note deed and after. And if we do go ahead with it, I don't want any things out in the public domain prejudicing how the lawyers might approach it. So prefer not. I'm sorry.
Understood, Brian. We'll move on to the next question. Now, why wouldn't Antilles seek one of the two La Demahagua JV investors to participate for a strategic position to at least underwrite the capital raise? Because it is in their interest to provide funding for Nueva Sabana so that their larger JV can remain viable.
Where the two La Demahagua JV investors come from, other than the fact that we've indicated that we're going to be looking for at least one, but not until middle of next year. The reality is that the value of the La Demahagua project will be quite difficult to establish before the DFS is completed in Q3 2025, which means the joint venture can't really start dealing with the prospect of either sale of 50% of the project or alternatively bringing in new shareholders until around the middle of 2025. So it's obvious that these potential investors are not available at the moment to underwrite the current issue or to take up any shortfall. We're in the throes of talking to people. I've started preliminary discussions with two parties, one Middle East and one Chinese, but where that will lead, I don't know, and it won't accelerate those discussions till at least middle of next year.
So it appears that whoever underwrites the capital raise at 1-to-1 stands to become a major holder, but would also increase confidence of take-up.
Well, firstly, the issue is not underwritten. What we are actually going to attempt to do is to attract a cornerstone investor to the company utilising any shortfall available, which would be a very low entry cost for someone to acquire a block of shares in the company. Again, two foreign prospects have approached me, actually, rather than me approaching them recently, with respect to taking up shortfall shares, ultimately getting to a 19.9 position. They understand the mining opportunities in Cuba that we have, and they are interested in becoming active investors. So where that will lead, I don't know. Discussion really won't start taking place in detail until after the close of the issue next week. And it's certainly not possible to establish a commercial arrangement with these people before it does close next week.
Now, given the
but I must agree with the person who's asked this question that the involvement of suitable new blood at the investor level and at the board level would be positive for existing and future shareholders. I think it's important. The company needs some change in direction and major shareholders.
Thanks, Brian. Now, given the decay in the share price and dilution, will the company consider at a later point issuing replacement lower priced options for the AAUOC after they expire?
A number of long-standing shareholders who received the current listed options with placements going back a while have approached me with the same question, actually. Would the company consider issuing new options in substitution, effectively, for those that will expire mid-next year and obviously not be in the money? I would personally support such an issue, but it would have to be made, as I understand it, to all shareholders and existing option holders, and also those that take up the new options in this issue. So it's not complicated. I've seen it done by many parties, but and even though I would support it personally, I certainly want to canvass the opinion of the major shareholders to make sure they were supportive before we went forward with something like this. Something that won't be considered in any event till probably second quarter of next year.
Thanks, Brian. A couple more questions to finish. What cost-cutting measures is the company taking to ensure funds last long enough until funding is secured for the Nueva Sabana project?
Well, the overheads have already been substantially reduced over the past 6 months, and a major reduction will happen in the next 12 months with my own management fees being more than halved, primarily because of my time involved is reduced significantly with the completion of the restructuring of the joint venture. The only things that I've really got left to do will take place in the next few months, hopefully, and that's the completion of the offtake agreement for Nueva Sabana and the financing. After that, very little to do. So it'll come down significantly, my fees. The reality is we've only got one full-time employee in Australia. It's our CFO, who's also recently taken on the role of company secretary. The only other party on the payroll is effectively our executive director, James Tyers, who's responsible for activities in Cuba, and all of his charges, including travel and accommodation and salary and so forth, are actually charged to the joint venture. One thing that we are considering is reducing the board from 4 to 3 members, or alternatively reducing fees. So we've got things pretty well nailed down, and of course the continuing legal costs that we've incurred over the last few years for arbitration, trying to defend tax assessments, no longer happening, which is a positive thing.
Thanks, Brian. So currently, what are Antilles Gold's 3 most critical success factors in continuing as a viable ongoing business concern?
Well, I'd say firstly, the most important thing is to complete this 4 million raise, either through the current issue or placement of any shortfall in the subsequent months. That would be primary, but we've got to keep the wheels turning. And more to the point, keep them on. The second point would probably important. It would be settle the matters with the Dominican Republic on a positive note. The third, very important item is to arrange finance for the Nueva Sabana mine. And I'll give you a fourth, and that is to monetize at least part of our investment in Cuba before the end of next year, which is our intention.
Thanks, Brian. And just one final question. In your view, what are the key investment highlights for those looking to invest or continue to invest in Antilles Gold?
Well, obviously the company is seriously undervalued. We've assembled a portfolio of fairly impressive properties in the joint venture at a very low cost. The prospect of monetising our investment in Cuba by the end of next year at a significant premium to the cost, I believe, is quite real. And the porphyry copper deposits in a JV, I'm sure, will attract the interest of a major after we have undertaken some additional drilling. So they're the basic takeaways.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you all for joining me. And I'd also like to thank Brian for presenting and taking the time to answer some questions. As I mentioned before, a recording of the webinar will be on Antilles' website and social media platforms later today. Brian, before I let you go, did you have any final comments to leave with us today?
No, none at all, other than thanking everybody for their attendance. Thanks, Alex, for organising it.
No worries. Well, that wraps up for us here. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.